Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Rowe.
And I'm Nique exemplifies.
And welcome to The Invisible Men, where we make the achievements of incredible men invisible no more. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe. I'm a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
Hello, I'm Nique exemplifies, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI.
And Nique, great to see you. As our viewers know, we have the Invisible Men as a way to demystify Black excellence by introducing our viewers to folks that you may have heard of, but more likely haven't. And we love to have people on who've just led exceptional lives, building their families, their businesses, and just making great contributions to our society, and yet often are not in the general dialogue or narrative, particularly as it relates to Black men. And today we're very pleased to have Barry Lawson Williams with us, who is a fellow Harvard Business School alum, which is fantastic. So Barry, great to see you.
Thank you. Looking forward to sharing some thoughts today.
Yeah, and Barry joins us. He's a retired business executive, a great career in finance and investment, and was on the board of, 14 different corporate boards, Barry? Is that right?
14 public company boards, yes.
That is extraordinary. Well, we'll definitely have to talk about that, because that's an area that, again, most people don't even know is a pathway to really learn about how companies operate, how you can generate revenue. But before we even step into where you are today, talk a little bit about your early days when you were coming up the ranks and the challenges that you faced and how you were able to overcome them in those early days.
Well, it's hard to think of myself as an invisible man because I'm 6'6" and 300 pounds. And I am most noted. The only way you've heard about me is that I held an NCAA record for close to 30 years. And that is, I played college basketball at Harvard, and I guarded Bill Bradley when Bill established the Princeton scoring record. He couldn't have done it without me. So that's my claim to athletic fame. I guarded him when he established the record. No, I grew up in an interesting family in that both of my parents went to college, and actually both went to some graduate school. In my father's case, that meant he took his accounting degree and worked for the U.S. Post Office. And my mother took her teaching degree from Hunter College in New York and became a teacher. I was one of three boys growing up in the suburbs of New York. And I always say we were the Jeffersons because my family was from the Bronx in Harlem. And we moved up to Mount
Vernon. You moved on up. You look a little bit like Sherman
Moving up the line. But I've got to tell you, it's easy to describe my childhood because I never had a chance. And the reason I say that is my mother was a teacher, and I went to her school for a while. And there never was an issue about whether I did my homework or whether I fooled around in class. It just wasn't allowed. But my mother actually did something growing up that I didn't realize until I grew up. And that is, my mother was a remedial reading teacher. And she always would have these kids who had reading issues, what have you, come by the house for tutoring. And my mother seemed to be totally disorganized. And she would say to my brothers and I, while I'm helping this person, could you help this other person? And I couldn't figure out why my mother was so disorganized. And this was her way of making sure that we did our homework, that we were and we were able to teach others. So, but I grew up, and I made a big decision in my life. In that is, my parents got divorced when I was 13. I didn't want to take sides, so I decided to go away to school, and then I went away to private school for high school, and that was a feeder for the Ivy Leagues. And the end of that story is I wound up going to Harvard College, taking a year off on a fellowship, and then going in the joint program at Harvard Law and Harvard Business School. So spent a lot of time at Harvard.
You know, Ian and I were talking prior to this conversation that I personally have known several African-American men who did the Harvard College, Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School trifecta. And I don't think it was coincidence. And I sort of asked the question, I doubt you fell into those remarkable opportunities, but were you proactive in pursuing this, Harvard education across 3 schools, or how did that play out?
Well, Harvard College, obviously I knew it was a good school, but my family on my father's side was from Boston, and I loved Boston. And on weekends, I would go to my grandmother's house and have smothered pork chops while people were having scrambled eggs in the dormitory or something like that. So it was easy to choose Harvard as an undergraduate. For grad school, despite a good education and educated parents, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of role models. I didn't know anybody in business and all the professions. And so the options for my generation were you became a teacher, a doctor, or a lawyer. And I chose the lawyer part. And since I like Boston, I just decided to stay there. I was in the first class that did the joint program. So I was in law school, and that just meant I spent another year. But
understood.
But I tell you, when I went to Harvard Law School, I thought, because I met somebody, that I wanted to be an international lawyer. I didn't even know what that is, and I still don't. And I've never been. And the only reason I went to business school was I thought I could be a better corporate lawyer. And as it turned out, I did spend some time in law, but I liked the business side better. And I think law made me a better business executive rather than business school made me a better lawyer.
Understood.
Yeah, and so it sounds like from a young age, I mean, sorry to hear that your parents got divorced, but at age 13, you went away and then to Harvard. How did you deal in those early years, and were issues of race even relevant to you at that time? Because it sounds like you struck out on at an early age of being independent in pursuing your career.
I wanted to make some of my own decisions. That's why I decided to go away. And I did go away to one of those New England prep schools where there was like one Black person in each class. There were so few of us that people didn't fuss over us. Now, the advantage I had was I was an athlete, and that was a device that people were attracted to you because you played on the teams and what have you. But it was lonely, no doubt about it. And I went to the first large class at Harvard for African Americans, and that meant there were, I think, 32 men and 6 women out of a class of if you combine Harvard and Radcliffe, that'd be a class of like 1,800. So again, the advantage I had is I knew friends who were attending school in the Boston area, and I had family. So I had more of a support group in college than most people, and that helped a lot. But I made a critical decision my sophomore year at Harvard. And I said, I'm going to make myself, I'm not going to lead two lives. You know, my freshman year, Friday night, I was running over to BU and hanging out with my friends. And I said, sophomore year, I'm going to be black and at Harvard at the same time. And I'm going to make Harvard black too, or at least having to deal with my blackness.
And and how did that play out? What did that mean to you?
Well, started doing more things on campus. I missed a lot of my friends, but I got to be better friends with the blacks on campus. And, you know, we started the early roots of an African-American association.
Got it.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I think Ian and I both know folks that, you know, when you're in that lonely position, sometimes you abandon your core, you abandon your identity to simply blend in and hopefully be more accepted. But I think your brave decision to, in fact, embrace yourself, be yourself, and help pull the campus along to recognize and support you. That's a powerful step you took as a very young man. Well,
I think you cannot be afraid to make some difficult steps in your life. That's very important. You've got to be you, and you got to have a path to get what you want.
And Barry, it seems like now fast forwarding to this stage of your career, it sounds like you've been quite a support person now yourself for a number of Black executives as they've tried to navigate their careers. And you mentioned that you interviewed 50 seasoned Black corporate directors about their experiences. Were there any common themes that you think would be of interest to our audience in terms of what they had to go through to kind of illuminate if others are interested?
Well, the reason I did the study was that I was retiring from boards, and I told you I served on 14. And, you know, like 5 years ago, I started thinking about what were the chances that I would be replaced on these boards by an African American. And at that time, I was on 5 boards. And my best guess was 2 and only 2. And the number turned out to be 2 and only 2. I tried equally as hard in all situations, but in most cases, I didn't have the critical factor, which was the support of the CEO. In the other cases, even when people embrace diversity, they look to a very broad definition of diversity and took women or other types of people and then specifically focus on Blacks. As for the study, I have it on my website. I encourage people to look up Barry Lawson Williams.com. And there were 5 major findings. The study came out in February before George Floyd. So the most impressive finding needs to be updated. And that finding was that most of the seasoned Black directors that I interviewed were only cautiously optimistic about increased Black representation on corporate boards in the next 5 years. They thought, again, that there were many factors, but one of them was this much broader definition of diversity. There were also the lack of rotation on boards. People get on and stay forever.
Yeah.
And then there were competing skill sets, all going for that one or so seat that came up. Obviously, with the George Floyd and related incidents, there's been a much greater call for specifically Black representation on corporate boards. But again, we've got so far to go. I just was looking at a study that said I believe there were roughly 60 women and roughly 50 diverse men who were recruited for major corporate boards in the fourth quarter of 2020. Well, we're talking about the Fortune 500, the S&P 500, the Russell 2000, plus we're talking about private companies. So as happy as I am that we had 50 new appointments, it's just a drop in the bucket of where we have to go. So we got a long way to go.
Do you think the issue is an issue of discrimination? Do you think it's an issue, a pipeline issue? What's holding more corporations back from inviting more racially diverse folks onto their directorships?
Well, you're touching on the second major finding of the 50 Black directors that I interviewed. They had been on 274 boards seats, and over 80%.
So on average, each of them was on at least 5 different boards
in their career. Not all were on 5 at one time, more than 3 at a time, but
right.
five in their career. And 80% said they got on boards not because of race, although race was obviously a helpful factor, but 80% said they got on boards through relationships. Now you got to have the required skill set, but the facts of life, no one is going to get on a corporate board unless someone knows that person and can vouch for them. So they didn't get on through search firms predominantly or what have you. They got on through relationships. And that is the major factor. People have a tendency to use their own Rolodex. So the majority of board searches are done around the table by existing board members, and their friends are their friends. They are not diverse people. And until we get a system, a vehicle where more of my friends are their friends, it's not going to happen. There's also the perception that there's a lack of supply, and we're just blowing that right now out of the woodwork. A group of directors, not simply the ones I interviewed, but other fellows on the East Coast, we're working together to identify aspiring Black talent. And we're approaching 500 names, where for each name, we have an experienced Black director who will vouch for that person. And we don't have all the people who are capable. We just have the people that someone we know who's been in the boardroom can vouch that that person could be successful, effective in a corporate board setting. So, if I would do my 1, 2, 3, I'd say 1 is we've got to get into the inventory of existing corporate boards by developing relationships, much like the relationships that enable us to get on boards. 2, we have to make people aware of the source of aspiring candidates. And I am working hard to identify and get support for the numerous platforms that are developing candidate lists, specifically of Black candidates. There are 17 that I've identified, and I'm sure there are more. And then the third thing we have to do is increase board size or somehow increase board rotation, because on a corporate board, on average, less than 1 seat comes up every year.
Excellent. So helpful. Barry, as
Can I just mention one other, because you asked me the major findings, and there were 5, and I will just briefly say some of the others that you would find interesting is seasoned Black directors like myself found there was a lack of access to the boards backed by VC and private equity firms. So that's a whole other area, the private companies. They also felt there were public companies in technology that limited access because they placed too much emphasis in our minds on domain knowledge and not on the other broader skills that make somebody effective in a boardroom. And finally, they mentioned even consumer products, which is surprising because you would think consumer product companies would want to know different markets, growth markets, and have representatives of those markets. The final thing I'll mention, because I know we've got to get on, but this one I've caught a lot of flack for, and I've tried to be a better explanation. I asked these 50 senior corporate Black directors, what was your largest regret? And pretty much all said, not advocating diversity sooner, more often, louder. And it wasn't because they didn't believe in diversity, but in getting on a board, no one wanted to be a single issue director. No one wanted to be the diversity director. No one wanted to be solely the Black director.
Right.
So it took a while for people to get on the right committees, to develop the right collaboration, and then to speak up. And all of these people did later in their career. But it was interesting. They wish they had done it sooner, louder, more often. So those were sort of the major findings of that study.
Brilliant. Yeah, Barry, your career has been so rich. There's so many things we could talk about. One thing I'd love to hear about personally, is there someone that you remember that you think about that was truly exceptional as a business leader, that never got an opportunity to lead a company, to be a CEO? If there is that person, I'd love to get your view on why they never became a CEO and kind of the context around that.
Well, you gave me that question in advance, and I thought it was such a great question. So here we go. The first choice I have is Jim Brown.
Oh.
Jim Brown, the football player.
Oh.
And if you haven't seen the recent
I have.
documentary, it's a beautiful documentary, A Night in Miami. But I knew some of Jim's friends. And therefore, my first job in graduate school during the summer was working for Jim Brown, the National Negro Industrial and Economic Union.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, I thought Jim was quite a leader and visionary, and he knew the importance of Black economic development. He was a hell of a football player. He was a hell of a womanizer, partier. but Jim had a very serious side, and he understood the needs, the importance of Black economic development, and he was a visionary in that respect. I think he was before his time, but when I look at the qualities of what makes an effective CEO, Jim had them all.
Barry, I just want to stop you for a minute and just say, I love Jim Brown. I've read probably 6 books on him. I've met him twice. I've met his wife. And I just literally every year on Twitter, I just send him a note. He doesn't really know, but I say, Mr. Brown, I just want to give thanks for all the contributions you've made. So for you to say that is just so incredibly powerful. He was also the greatest lacrosse player of all times. And
yes.
You remember that he did the deal with Columbia Pictures with Richard Pryor, which could have been one of our great movie studios, but Richard Pryor destroyed the opportunity. So that would have been an opportunity for him to be a CEO, which Richard Pryor destroyed. But God, that's brilliant. Wow.
My second one is a little less well known, and I can't even remember how I met the individual, but Franklin Williams. Franklin Williams was he was regional heads of various NAACPs, And then he became the head of the Phelps Stokes Foundation. But I was introduced to Franklin because he was the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Ghana. And I traveled in my little knapsack after college. I took a fellowship and traveled around the world, and I stayed with him. And he adopted me. And he became the first real mentor I ever had.
Wow.
And he introduced me to situations, pushed me, made me think about things. He was a great mentor. And we often got in trouble because he used to say I was his son. And then he said, when family members said, well, how are you related? He said, oh, it's my godson. It's my godson. But Franklin was never, quote, a CEO of a corporation. But again, he would have been a great leader. He understood how to reach out for younger talent, how to help younger talent. Again, I think he had all the attributes of a CEO. I could go on because, I started my career at McKinsey, and some of the black guys there had the opportunity come along. I think they would have been CEO potential. So I'll stop at that. But I'm glad you agree at least with my first choice, Jim Brown.
Oh my goodness, incredible. Ian, do we have time for our speed round before we wrap it up?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So, Barry, we with all our guests, we do a speed round where we sort of offer up two individuals or two philosophies and ask you to pick one and explain briefly why you would choose. So we often start with maybe one of the easiest ones, which is Malcolm or Martin.
Again, I'm going to be a bad person to choose because I think everyone can't be a Martin Luther King themselves, and everybody can't be a Malcolm. But I also think that just about everybody at times and in certain circumstances needs a Martin. And I'm becoming more convinced that at times everybody needs a Malcolm. So you need both. I'm not going to choose between the two because I think you really need both, and you will encounter the need for both at different times and different circumstances. I love them both.
Very good. Corporate executive or entrepreneur?
That was a probing question. I, with my skill set, think that I'm better off as a corporate leader. I think as an entrepreneur, I never had a great idea. I never had a great team to work with. And I never had a willingness to fail early and often. I think those are the three prerequisites if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur. I'd rather work with later companies, and I have a failing, and that is I think I can fix anything. So I stay with my failures too long. So I'm more on the corporate business side. That's my skill set.
Very good. And the last one is civil rights or economic development?
Again, I'm going to be a bad person because I'm going to say voter rights. I think that's what we need first. Then it backed up by economic rights, economic development. And if you have voter rights and economic development, then you could press for civil rights. I think civil rights are crucially important, but we cannot do an effective job unless we get voter rights first and then get some more economic empowerment.
Right.
I am crushed that in terms of relative black wealth, we are where we were maybe 30 years ago. And on average black wealth is 1/10 of what white wealth is. That just galls me. And I'm working on that. And that's why I'm supporting young black people in their endeavors, because I think we need to create our own institutions. And
so when you think about that issue, before we get your advice to Daryl, when you think about that issue of generating wealth, it sounds like in your experience, you've actually interacted with a number of Black executives, male and female, who've been quite successful. What is it that we can learn from those individuals that you've interacted with over time that are at such cross purposes with those terrible numbers that you just said? What is it that they've done that allowed them to face discrimination, all of those challenges, and yet still be successful?
Well, I think the common core is that most of those individuals had a mentor or a sponsor that helped them out. And you can't do it on your own. You need support. You got to have a plan. You got to be determined. And it's not a straight line. You know, you're gonna do well at times and not as well at other times, but you got to keep moving forward. So that I think is the key message. I worked for McKinsey, and then I worked for Bechtel. And the key difference in my career is when I had great sponsors, great mentors, and when I had a support group.
Got it. Well, as our viewers know, when Nique and I conceived the Invisible Man 30 years ago, we created this character, Daryl, 16-year-old Black kid who lives in forgotten USA, this imaginary urban city. And our goal with the other Harvard graduate male students was to provide advice to Daryl as he was about to embark upon his passage into young adulthood. And even though great progress has been made on certain fronts, there's still many Daryls in the world. And so, Barry, in closing, we'd love for you to, if you had a Daryl in front of you who has no idea what a board directorship means, or even what the life of a corporate exec means, and is trying to just sift it all out, especially given the current context, what would you say to Daryl about what he has ahead of him?
Well, I think the main thing I would say to Daryl is, why don't you talk to one of my three sons who are 37, 40, or 41? And it's not a put off, but I'm not sure Daryl would totally understand my path and how I got there. It's kind of not real for Daryl at 16. So I think he's got to talk with people who are younger, who are taking the early steps to put you on that path. But if Daryl would listen to me, and I would love to talk to Daryl, I'd go back and remind Daryl that I'm a son of a school teacher. And to me, everything has been made possible because of education. And I tell Daryl, focus on your education. Education will give you, put you in a position to have options in life. I'd also tell Daryl, get your computer stuff down, coding, what have you. That will give you the greatest mobility. More jobs require computer skills than you can imagine. And that will give you mobility to move through that area. And then the final thing with Daryl is, I'd say, and this is very difficult, you got to choose your friends. And I don't want you to diss your old friends, but you got to understand that not everybody is going to want what you're going to want. And I had this growing up, that I had some awfully good friends that I stayed good friends with, but I knew they weren't interested in the trajectory that I wanted. And so you got to find a couple of people like yourself who want to do something, and get to know them, and you could support each other. And I'd say the final thing is, Daryl, you need to dream. 16 is too early to figure out what you want to do in life. I'm 76 and I'm still trying to figure it out. But you got to dream, because then you could be a little more intentional about what you do. So, then I finally tell Daryl, if he really wants to relate to me, let's go on the court, and I still have a good jump shot.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Still have a good jump shot.
I love it. You got to have that competitive spirit no matter what. Well, Mr. Barry Lawson Williams, thank you very much for this opportunity to chat with you. You have a lifetime of experience, and thank you for sharing it with our viewers.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and let me know how I can help. And let's get some more Daryls teamed up with people like me so we could help the careers of the Daryls of our community.
That's exactly what we want to do. We want to demystify excellence for Daryls of every race, and because we sorely need it at this time. So thank you, everyone.
Can I just mention one thing? And because I think this is important to Daryl. I picked up something more than 20 years ago, and that is that I write an annual letter to my 3 sons. And reason I write a letter is I'm braver saying things in a letter than person. And this year's letter, I said, your father's been pretty successful, but let me tell you this. I've had my failures in life. So I'm going to tell you about 3 professional failures in my life and 3 personal failures. And the most important thing is I'm going to tell you what I've learned from them. So I want Daryl to know that life is not a success straight line, and that there are many paths. He's not behind in any timetable or what have you. There are many routes to success. You got to work hard to get there, but you got to learn from your mistakes and move on. So that's the last thing I wanted to tell Daryl.
When was the first? At what age did you, for your kids, did you start writing that letter?
I have written it. This is the 20th year or 21st year.
Wow. You've just inspired me. Maybe this is what I should do for my own children. That's a very powerful ritual to create within your own family.
Well, I have to warn you, watch out for the responses.
My father always used to tell me writing is probably the most important thing you can do, because it forces you to crystallize what you actually believe about the topic that you're writing. And it would be very profound to decide, what is it that I want to say to my children this year that will become a permanent record? Because I presume you still have those letters from 20 years ago.
I do. And one of my sons I know has all the letters. I think another one of my sons has rewritten most of the letters and wanted to send them back to me. Thank you all. Keep doing the great work you're doing.
Excellent.
Yeah, Barry, I just want to say that I'll say it as simply as possible. It's my personal privilege and honor to know you, and you've inspired me today to think about my life and to think about my role as a father. And I'm very grateful. So I hope, on your worst day, never forget how many people you've inspired, because you're really special.
Thank you much, Lee.
Yeah.
And you had a very special father who was a friend of mine.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you. Well, if you'd like to see or listen to other episodes of The Invisible Men, please go to www.invisible.men. And again, my name is Ian Rowe of American Enterprise Institute.
And I'm Nique Exemplifies. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes at the AEI podcast channel on YouTube or the website invisible.men or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.